All right, so part two of the car modeling at a glance video. So we're going to talk a little bit about kind of a recap slash adding a little bit of extra to these little pieces or parts. I'm going to show you how to do the doors and stuff like this, but this is just kind of a temporary thing anyways. So, but basically you can see I tossed on a little livery, kind of got some colors going and some different materials on it. The basic idea of the first video is that when you start modeling those panels out, if you control your edge flow and you get it really nice and clean, you can get those bigger, like um, the better shading for the like larger, smooth, curvier surfaces. That's the idea of it, anyways. And then you can start to break it out into other little components, right? Like the doors and all that. So, but when it comes to like adding details, like adding little cuts into the surface, a lot of this stuff is just standard sub-D modeling for the most part, but you'll lose some of the shading potentially. That could be a problem. But you can always go back to the base of the model. You duplicate it and then you start working on it. You don't just replace it, right? Or lose it. You save it for later because you might be able to transfer some of the normals data from that original just base mesh, if you will, and you can transfer it to different parts of your model potentially. Okay. Otherwise, you're going to have to figure out how to fix the shading as you work, and that's the idea of doing patches and things like that. So you might have to patch something later on, but you're not going to be able to change like the overall flow of the geometry. It's kind of set in stone for the most part. I mean, you can do a little bit of work on it maybe, but when it comes to things like doors as well, you got to think about like how these things function mechanically, right? You can't just like for example, I set this up with an empty here on local rotation, so it'll rotate on Y, and that gives me the opportunity to now kind of play around to see if this might even function mechanically the way I want it to. And so we can see that it's actually doing something kind of like the real one, anyways. So that's kind of nice. Also, these base pieces that you start to separate, this is where you're going to start adding the additional little stuff you need, like door jambs, right? So you might need that, and you might have to model that from this piece, or potentially, like if you're doing the interior at a certain point, you might just do the interior panel and have it meet up with this door jamb so that they look like they're a solid piece, but they might not be, right? Things like that. So we're going to go back to that base model real quick, the third one there. And so let's do this. Let's go ahead and we can see kind of what was going on here. And I got the subdivisions up really high. We're looking for, I'm turning off optimal display off. It depends on your project, what kind of resolution you need out of it. But generally speaking, you're going to need, if you're going to continue to work in sub D, you're probably going to want quite a bit of polygons potentially. But a lot of times what will end up happening is you'll hit a certain point and then you're just going to more than likely stop working in sub D for the rest of the model if you're doing like game models and things like that. So, but if you're doing VFX, there's no telling how close you need to get to this thing. You might spend some serious time working out how like a really nice quality model if it needs close-ups and all that fun stuff, right? So this for game maybe okay. Who knows? This is probably too dense. So you have options. You can stop here. You can stop here. You can stop here. It's up to you. Personally, I like maybe this one here, right? And so I just apply the subdivision, still have a mirror on it. Sometimes the mirrors cause problems, but that's usually down the symmetry line, right? You might have to dissolve the symmetry line there. And so this door just happened to be one of the most maniacal doors on a vehicle possible, but kind of simple in a way, in the sense that good luck selecting it, right, with all these. Let's see if I can get some patches going. Control and shift clicking usually does that. You can see we're not getting the edge flow here isn't getting this little section through here, right? So if it is, I'm missing it somehow. Let's try using the cursor selector. Okay, I don't have a line there for it. Okay, so this is where that edge flow, like I was saying, was extremely important. But sometimes, in worst case scenario, you screwed up. It's probably better to go back to your initial setup and fix that. But if you really had to cut this out, you'd probably go to a Boolean Ngon workflow and work this exactly how it needs to be, and then we'll meet it to this one because you might have to do that. It's not fun, but it might be required, right? And so here we have the ability to now unselect these ones. So it really just depends on what you're doing, I guess. If how much time you're going to put into that base mesh. You can see that's going to be a lot nicer, right, than what it was. And so this is the point of taking your time on those meshes as well. You really have to be very picky about what you're doing because even if you wanted to put different materials on different parts of the vehicle, you have to think about those kinds of things. But we can see we get pretty close to what we want here. It's pretty nice. It's not too bad. So this is going to be the pillar here. This will be part of the window, I think. Okay. And this one, like I was saying, has some crazy doors. It does something like follows this line through here and it goes across there maybe. It actually kind of does a little thing in here with a detail, but we're not doing the detail yet. So if we separate this, separate it as a selection, has the mirror on it, we're going to turn the mirror off for now or get rid of it. I want this to hinge from a certain part on here. This is where machine tools is a lifesaver. Like say I want it to hinge in this area. You place the 3D cursor there, you can create an empty, and you can align this empty to the 3D cursor. So now we actually have the rotational value of that normal, right? And so we can parent this door to this empty, hit Control P, and keep the transform, okay? And that now allows us to rotate, but we have to rotate on local. So we can hit R, Y, and we can do this. Now, if you just freely rotate this, at some point, you're probably gonna, I realize I just missed a polygon. Hold on. If you rotate, if you rotate it too freely, like that, it's going to cause problems. I'm gonna put it that way. Because the problem is that it's already at a custom rotational value. If you didn't write that down somewhere, you're gonna lose it. So you need to snap while rotating, and that's the big one. So hold control while rotating on Y, and now you'll snap incrementally, so you can always snap incrementally back and get it to line back up again. Okay, that's a that's a good one that can mess up your whole project real quick if you screw that up. So, or if you save incrementally, you can always go back and maybe find these values and write them down or something. All right, but because we can now rotate this thing, it's pretty cool, but you might want some door jams in it, right? So the door jam itself, there's a couple different ways you could create it, I guess. I like doing solidifies on a lot of panels, and so I just solidify it a little bit. You can see here. All right, so this whole back side, once I apply that solidify, um, probably not going to need to use most of this, but let's try doing use mesh machine, click an edge, alt click it, see what happens here with that. Okay, it gets most of it, but it doesn't get quite all of it. And then you can see it shoots out the bottom here. So we're just going to alt shift click everywhere. Select all these real quick. Let's see if the selection method works that I want to use. Sometimes it has weird hiccups, but we're going to use select. You got to make sure you get all of it too. We're going to use select loops and then loop inner region. Okay. So we can do that. Now we can do like an inset. Okay. And we might have a little bit of an issue here because take note, this is it's not really optimized right now for this. So sometimes we might have a little bit of an issue. You might want to go back and clean those kinds of things up. Perhaps personally, what I'm going to do instead is just delete everything. And I think that'll work out just fine for myself. And so something like this, we could extrude on X. You can see we can start to get that door jamb going maybe. But we're going to spend some time modeling in this area, right? These are going to have like different thicknesses and all kinds of stuff going on in them, but you get the idea. Now you can actually just go out and you can even add loop cuts, hold the shading back or whatever. Do that kind of fun stuff like that, right? And so if we had originally, probably should have did the window later, not right now, but you can see the windows in here as well. We don't have it quite set up the way we need it. So we'd want to tweak our end result here before we probably applied everything. Don't forget though, you have, if you're using machine tools, you have the surface slide feature, which adds a temporary shrink wrap, right? And so you could do things like this, but that's not going to work well if it was solidified, right? So just keep that in mind. You might be able to shift things around quite a bit still before it kind of messes up the shading and all that. And I mean quite a bit. So this whole edge, maybe I want it to run down. It's not changing the volume or the shape for the most part. So you can really do this number. You could do this on all kinds of panels too. It doesn't matter where it's at. It's shrink wrap into what you started with. And it's almost impossible to like use this without this add-on. It's almost impossible to do this with any kind of meaningful purpose. You can see this one's a little weird in here. A little hard to remake that one right. That's probably incorrect. That's probably gonna mess up the shading. But still, the idea counts, right? So we could potentially have the window selection we want now. And we might want to separate that. Windows oftentimes are inset a little bit, right? Or pushed in. I'll turn surface slide off with this. So Alt S, we can scale inwards on normals. Right? That's kind of fun because then we can grab this loop here. Oh, I didn't turn surface slide off, it still worked. Let's try that again. I turn it off in edit mode. Alt S it in. Okay, and they still have, this still has surface slide on. Let's turn it off. Let's see what happens. Okay. Looks mostly okay. What the heck happened here? It was okay until I did that apparently. There's no going back now. Let's Control Z until let's see if that pops and fixes itself. Okay, let's turn the surface slide off. Okay. Oh, okay. Finish surface slide here. So I broke surface slide, guys. That can happen, I guess. It's probably because of the duplication or something. I don't know. Something like that happened. Let's go back to before surface slide was on. No, that's too much. Let's apply the surface slide. I think that might be the problem. We're deleting it. Ah, there you go. Yeah. I've had it happen before. I just didn't realize you apply them. That's all. Kind of weird. Anyways, it worked. So who cares? All right. So we can extrude. There we go. Probably move it in a little further since it doesn't seem to be moving too much up there. Or if it is, it's not right. We're not going to give this window any depth to it. We'd have to realign probably somehow up here as well. Apparently that just came off when we scaled it in. And maybe we could just push it back out a little. Get it closer, right? And so this is the idea. If you're subdividing still, you're going to notice the edges, they still come inwards. And so if you subdivide one thing, subdivide the other thing. That's the easiest way to deal with it. If your edges aren't sharp, standard subdue practices, sharpen up your edges like this. But you're going to have to do both of them basically the same way until they match or are very close. You can get away with little discrepancies, but a lot of times you need to do this kind of stuff. So extrude the window. I'm going to hit Alt N and flip the normals because they weren't aligned. It's not entirely realistic, obviously, but you get the idea. You can start working with this stuff until you get something that works for you. This should all be parented still. So, yeah, there you go. And so that's what we end up with, right? Not too bad. And you could do this for all kinds of stuff. I mean, literally, if you want to cut out like the back window, for example, it's it's the same process. You can literally just go through here and start picking and choosing, doing surface slides or doing cuts. And for the most part, you'll be okay, generally speaking. At this resolution, it's high enough that it doesn't really matter too much. When you're trying to make bigger changes, though, like you're trying to do dramatic stuff like this one, right? This is going to get a little bit hairy because we can surface slide it, but you can see we're going to end up moving stuff and kind of like a really visible panel at the, but it's pretty dramatic in a sense that may not be your best option. That's what I'm going to say. You might want to model this before you get to this point. So you're going to have to figure out when in your projects you need to do which details uh, because this just may not work, right? And so that was the point of it's basically the same thing would have happened here. You just polymodel it. Um, at some point, you'll do something like an inset, push it in, and you'll get a detail. That's really janky because apparently I have surface slide on still. But it'll be something like that. So when it subdivides, it'll look little bit nicer. And this ultimately, the subdivision mesh, is what will end up as my game resolution without LODs or anything like that. It's going to be pretty heavy, so it'll be over 100,000. Probably not ideal, just to be honest. So you really got to be careful with what resolutions you're working at. This is really the max here for a lot of game engines. If you have nanite, maybe it's different, but even nanite, when you have vehicle damage or whatever, you have to kick off nanite, and it's just the way they did it in the Matrix demo, anyway. So that's just kind of the way it works. But nonetheless, if you go through this practice enough, we'll go back to that model I had originally loaded up. You can do all kinds of stuff like this all over the place, and so like I said, you could do the back window here or whatever. It's just separated, right? It's just separated, and I added a couple little cuts across here just so I could run, and I ran the polygons in a way that I could just create these little sections, right? So it looks nice subdivided. When it's not subdivided, not so much. It looks a little bit more like that. Okay. And so balancing everything, guys. Balance, balance, balance. You got to find out when you need to do things and when you don't need to do things, right? Gas cap, for example. A lot of your objects are going to end up being separate. Wheels, obviously, are separate. Bumpers and things like that. All those little details, splitters, things like that. A lot of these things can be made separate and just kind of float near the geometry. Even things like side skirts or whatever, rocker panels and all that, right? So, um, but cutting shapes into things, this isn't as hard as you think. Once again, you do have the option of surface slide, so that's good. And you also have proportional edit at hand. So creating cylindrical shapes, if you need a different size, you can get pretty crazy with this. Not lying. It does shift your shading around quite a bit, but you can do it. And so that's kind of the idea there. So I just wanted to prove that you can do it. Like this is, you need like a perfect square. Well, you need even amounts of edges to make a decent cylinder. And you can see we can't really do that right now because of the shape of this thing. And so, this is where it gets fun because surface slide is on, right? And proportional edit. And look, now we can just try to maybe squeeze it in a little bit. Probably not a good idea, but let's do that. Rotate it. Loop tools, circle, scale it a bit, can move it a bit. Maybe we turn this off for a sec so we can kind of even it out. All right. This is not really that good to have all these shooting inwards that far. It's going to be pretty bad for the shading, just so you know. So sometimes you got to watch out for things like that. You can try doing like an inset and maybe taking this whole circle here and doing like smooth vertices and trying to get it to go back to a square a little bit. But you can see it's starting to mess with the shading quite a bit doing that. So you have to be careful with what you're doing. This is going to have less shading issues, generally speaking. Yeah, so let's finish the surface slide, inset, control, boom, inset. Oh, this one we got to extrude in apparently. 2 loop cuts, boom, there we go. All right. And so ideally you would do this kind of before you start, before you call it quits, right? Like before your last subdivision. And that's going to help some of that shading around it. And should make it look a little nicer at least. You might still get away with smoothing it out a bit. Just do a couple shift R's there. This section here, of course, you could try doing another loop cut. Well, turn off subdivision in edit mode real quick. You could try doing a loop cut, hit E, make it even, hit F if it's the wrong way. All right, now let it subdivide. Let's see what happens. Okay, yeah. Minor, tiny little minor shading issues possibly exist. And it may not be a perfect circle either. Sometimes that happens. But it's at least on the curve. And so if you do it in the right spot, it stays pretty flat like that, right? And so look at it with render preview real quick. You'll see that the shading does kind of fall apart right here though. And also because we did it on this edge, it's a little bit messed up, but it's pretty interesting that you can even do that kind of stuff. Um, Weighted normals, of course, you can always play around with those if you still want to try to use them. It's going to need shade auto smooth for it to work. And make sure you don't have custom normals, so clear them at times down here under auto smooth and all that. Clear custom normals. If it happened, you'll need to do that. And if you turn surface slide off, we'll slide down here. If you turn surface slide off, and you do loop tools and circle, it will flatten them. Just so you know, that's the difference, right? But sometimes that's useful if you need like a little cut into the surface a little bit, right? But it's going to give you a perfect circle now for the most part. The subdivision doesn't have much of an effect on that there though. So more subdivision, it's crazy, right? Anyway, so go through your whole project. You know, when you can just model things separately, model them separately. But when you need your panels to line up with the reflections and stuff, yeah, you want to make sure you got a really solid base for everything. And it's probably the easiest way to do it. It's the easiest way I've found to do it so far, to just take that little extra time to do it. And so, you know, you can see here, I can open a door now. Oops, you see I didn't snap it? That could be a problem. But can open a door at least, and could certainly start trying to create the other details we need for like the interior, for example. Uh, if we were to just say like we need the center console in the middle or something, we'll start doing those kinds of things, placing it where it needs to get placed, of course, in the center. So 0 on X. And so now we can start to work these out. Think of these as little separate sections though. Like you might be creating I'm going to press Y, rip that line bottom with machine tools, so I could just do a quick triangle here, like a place for the seat or something, right? So you might end up having to align this to the door jamb, but more than likely you're going to probably intersect it, to be honest. It might not be perfect, but you could try to make it perfect if you wanted, I guess. There's nothing wrong with that. And so when you're doing the interior, a lot of times, once you get it lined up to the exterior, hide this and just work on the interior. Don't even worry about the exterior at that point. Just make sure you're not shifting the places they meet up, right? Because then you can just do whatever you got to do. Boolean ngon workflow as well. Don't forget, like if you don't need subd, you don't need it. All right, don't use it if you don't need it. I love it, but it's just not always the fastest. So try doing that with subd. It could be a little bit of a problem. Of course, you can always turn simple ngon models into subd models rather quickly. So that's something you can consider. You can also do that, right? See, we're having a little bit of an intersecting problem here. Doing an inset. It's merged in that center. And you can see it actually works out pretty well. So, but then you could try to work these out, right? Make it into a subd model by cutting and doing 3 edges for these areas. Doing all that fun stuff, right? And of course, you can isolate these two, right? I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen right here. I was just looking at this, thinking about it. It's almost like I need pretty serious, kind of a serious setup here of quads, like a double sidewalk almost. Yeah, I think I'm going to dissolve that one or merge it. So double padding. Some people say double padding, double sidewalks, whatever. Kind of like that almost, basically. So at least this one area maybe subdivides by now, almost close to it. And this will eat up some time doing this, right? But you can see that corner now actually mostly works, which is nice. Not too bad anyways. The bottom here I'm going to do real quick because I already have a feeling this is going to be one of those times that, well, first of all, those need to merge, but you're going to have this really complicated corner that it's going to throw you for a loop, I'm pretty sure. So there's a lot of things that want to occur right here at this corner. So normally you would have this face, right? And it would shoot this way. So we have the 3 edges for this side. But then you need an edge on this side, and it needs to go out to this side. Right, and then this needs to have an edge here. And it's going to be something like that. But now this actually needs an edge to hold this side. You see? This is one of those crazy corners like that. It's really not that bad, but it looks something like this anyways. I guess it didn't want to cut there. It's not combined. It says, I'm not combined, I'm not cutting here. Okay, fine. Let's back you up a sec. So I can actually make a cut. That'd be nice. And then we'll merge those. There we go. That's a quad. These are all quads in this area, right? So when it subdivides, you can see it's, well, this is still a big ngon over here, so it kind of, let me just finish it out, I guess. Finish that one out that way. Take that one out. That one out. Just thinking about this corner. I don't know what I want to do. Guess we'll do it like that. I don't want to run them all the way through again. There we go. Okay. Now, hopefully, this will all subdivide here shortly. Blender added the ability to cut through n-gons and through triangles, which maybe some people really, really like that feature. I wish I could turn it off. They did that a while ago. Because there's times I don't want to actually cut through anything like that. I want it to stop, basically. So I know where my n-gon is, or triangle, whatever the case. I think we got a double here. Yep, there we go. And voila, we have now done this. You can see, um, not too bad. It doesn't at least like dig into it, but there might be times you want to actually like try to run it out like it's an inset or something like that. So that still could occur, I guess. Is the best way. Is what I'm trying to say. Like you could do that. And you see that also works. Okay. Kind of an interesting. I always thought this like setup was interesting anyways. So but yeah, now so you're basically pretty much there. Like you're seeing the possibilities now. So if you needed your floor panel, maybe it's something like that. And then you'd put a dash on top probably, or whatever else you got to put in here, right? So it's all going to start to get made at this point. Combining everything together though isn't the way to go. If it's a separate object in real life, even if it was like manufactured separately, like think of like welding. Sometimes it's better to make them separate at first and then try to make it look like it's welded later on. Same thing for like plastic pieces that use like split molds, things like that. And so, like a dashboard, if it has pieces, or like a door panel, it has pieces glued into it, right? Or you can model those separately, and you can bake those to a solid low poly. You don't necessarily have to bake like keep the high poly around. So things like that you can take into consideration can be quite useful, especially when you're trying to get like super high quality details with low polygon counts, right? But overall, yeah. So this is where we're at, right? Not too bad. Wasn't planning on doing this much for this vehicle, but you get the idea. So now we can kind of play around with it a little bit, see where it goes and all that fun stuff. All right. Anyways, that's it for this one, guys. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll check you out in the next one. All right, take care.